It was a typical afternoon at LAX. The air buzzed with the noise of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the muffled announcements echoing through the terminal. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something unusual happened. Dwayne, "The Rock" Johnson, a name known worldwide, found himself standing in front of a group of airport security staff, his brows furrowed in confusion. He was being escorted out of the secured area. "I'm sorry, sir, but you'll need to leave," the security officer said, his voice firm and unwavering. Dwayne looked around, his face a mix of disbelief and irritation. "What do you mean I need to leave? I'm flying out today. What's going on here?" His usual calm demeanor was slipping. This wasn't the first time he'd been at the airport, nor was it the first time he'd been recognized, but this felt different. The officer didn't flinch, and the other staff members seemed oblivious to the situation. "We have reason to believe you're not who you say you are, sir," another officer added, pointing at his ID badge. But that only made the confusion worse. It didn't make any sense. In that moment, a strange hush fell over the terminal. Passengers, who had been absorbed in their own worlds moments ago, started noticing the interaction. Phones began to appear, and whispers spread like wildfire. One by one, people began to pull out their phones, snapping pictures, some even recording videos. Dwayne felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him as his mind raced. What the hell was happening? "Do you even know who I am?" Dwayne asked, his voice quiet but tinged with an edge of disbelief. The officer, unperturbed, shook his head. "Doesn't matter, sir. Please step aside." For a moment, it felt as though the world had frozen. How was this happening? How had it come to this? Just a few minutes ago, he was a guest at the airport, ready to board his flight. Now, he was a spectacle. The unthinkable had just unfolded. Dwayne Johnson, the biggest name in Hollywood, was being kicked out of an airport. Wait, what's going on here?" a voice from the crowd suddenly shouted. A woman stepped forward, looking as stunned as everyone else. "Is that really The Rock?" she said in awe. Another person leaned over and whispered, "It's gotta be a prank. No way they're kicking him out for real." Dwayne stood there, his mind scrambling. He could feel the rush of emotions flooding him, embarrassment, confusion, frustration. But there was one thought above all else that made his chest tighten. Why wasn't anyone listening to him? The officer didn't flinch, offering no explanation beyond the cold words, "Please leave the area, sir, for your safety and ours." It was then, in that moment of confusion and humiliation, that Dwayne realized something that took him completely off guard. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was bigger. The cameras continued to flash, the whispers grew louder, and for a brief moment, he almost felt like he was losing control of the narrative of his own life. The question lingered in the air like a thick fog. What happens when you suddenly lose everything, even your identity? And as the airport staff ushered him further away from the security area, the world watched, wondering, what would The Rock do next? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wasn't just an action star. He wasn't just the guy who flexed muscles on screen, who grinned with that iconic eyebrow raise. No, he was more than that. He was a symbol of resilience, of someone who had carved his place in the world against all odds. But no one ever truly knew the full story of how Dwayne got here. They only saw the headline version, the former wrestling champion turned Hollywood superstar. What they didn't see were the quiet moments behind the scenes, the struggles that shaped him into the man he was today. And as the crowd at the airport whispered about him being kicked out, Dwayne found himself thinking back on those earlier years, the ones that had made him who he was. He grew up in a small town, a place where dreams were big but opportunities were few. Dwayne had always felt different. He wasn't like the other kids who seemed to fit in effortlessly. He had the size, the charm, but he also had something darker inside him, something he couldn't always explain. His childhood was far from perfect. His father, Rocky Johnson, was a professional wrestler, but their relationship was distant, strained. There was love, sure, but there were also years of feeling abandoned, of trying to prove himself. His mom, on the other hand, was the rock in his life. She showed him what it meant to be strong and selfless. He always knew he could count on her, but the lack of a close father figure left a hole in him that wrestling never quite filled. By the time Dwayne hit his teens, he had one goal: to get out of the small town, to make a name for himself. He wasn't sure how he was going to do it, but he knew he had the determination and drive to make it happen. So, when he got the chance to play football for the University of Miami, it was his shot, the chance he couldn't pass up. But football wasn't enough. His time at Miami showed him that as much as he wanted to be a success, his identity still felt incomplete. He wasn't just The Rock, he was Dwayne, the man behind the muscles, the tattoos, the personality. Still, he had no real clue who he was. As he entered the world of professional wrestling, Dwayne began to understand the true power of identity. His persona, The Rock, exploded in popularity. The crowd screamed for him, the cameras caught every move, and soon enough, he had the fame and the fortune. But as his wrestling career took off, something inside him was still yearning for more. And that more came in the form of Hollywood. Dwayne made his big break in movies, landing roles that showcased his charisma and physicality. He was cast in everything from action-packed blockbusters to family comedies. Hollywood loved him. Fans loved him. But even as the world watched him rise, Dwayne never felt fully at peace. Behind the scenes, there were moments of doubt, of wondering if he was truly understood, or if people only saw the image he portrayed. Was he The Rock to everyone, or was there still room for Dwayne Johnson, the man behind the character? Fast forward to now. Dwayne had become a cultural icon, the kind of person whose face was known worldwide. But the reality of his fame often made him feel disconnected, like a character in a play he could no longer control. Every time he went out, people recognized him. They asked for autographs, selfies, shouted his name. But in moments like this, when he was being treated like a nobody, forced to leave the very airport he frequented so often, Dwayne realized that, in the eyes of some people, even he wasn't exempt from the system. Even he wasn't above suspicion. It was then, as he stood just outside the security gate, trying to piece together what had just happened, that it hit him harder than ever before. The world had a way of reducing people to a single thing, one identity, one story. But it was never that simple. He wasn't just The Rock or the celebrity. He was Dwayne too. And right now, Dwayne wasn't being seen. "Hey, you all right?" A voice cut through his thoughts. Dwayne turned to see a young woman standing beside him, her face unsure but curious. She had noticed the scene from a distance and, like the others, was clearly trying to figure out what had happened. Dwayne let out a half-laugh, shaking his head. "Just a little confusion, you know? Guess I'm not as famous as I thought." The woman blinked, taking a step back as she took in his features more carefully. "Wait, hold on. You are him, aren't you?" "Yeah," Dwayne replied, offering a small smile. "I guess so. Or at least I was a minute ago." There was a brief pause before she spoke again. "I'm sorry, this is so weird. I saw you on the news and stuff. I never imagined." He chuckled, trying to lighten the tension. "Neither did I." She hesitated, then added, I just want to say, I think it's messed up. You shouldn't be treated like that. I've watched your movies. You're more than just a guy with muscles." Her words hit Dwayne harder than he expected. In that moment, it wasn't just the fame or the Hollywood success that mattered. It was the people who really saw him. Dwayne smiled at her, grateful for the kindness in her voice. "Thanks. I appreciate that." He looked back at the airport entrance. "But something tells me this is just the beginning of a much bigger story." The security guards didn't back down. As much as Dwayne tried to reason with them, as calm as he remained, the staff wasn't budging. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the longer he stood there in the bustling airport terminal, the more isolated he felt. It was like everyone had forgotten who he was, and not in the way a celebrity might forget their own importance, but in a way that made him feel invisible. The irony of it wasn't lost on him. The world saw him as The Rock, the larger-than-life action hero, but here in the crowded chaos of an airport, no one was recognizing him for who he really was. The guards weren't swayed by the crowd whispering, or by the fact that people started pulling out their phones to capture the moment. "Sir, please," one of the security officers insisted again, a little more stern this time. You need to follow us. Dwayne's brow furrowed deeper. Follow you? For what? Another officer, a woman this time, stepped in. You're being asked to leave. There's been a misunderstanding, and you're no longer allowed in the restricted area. Please cooperate. This wasn't the kind of thing Dwayne was used to. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. There were always cameras, sure, but there were also smiles, respect. But here, there was none of that. There was no recognition, no respect, only confusion and distrust. It was the first time in his life, in his career, where he wasn't just another Hollywood star. To these people, he was just another suspect. He felt his patience thinning. You really don't know who I am? He asked, his voice calm but laced with disbelief. We know who you say you are, sir, the officer responded. But you'll have to leave if you can't provide the appropriate clearance. The crowd around them had only grown, and the tension in the air was palpable. Phones were still snapping pictures and recording the exchange, and whispers grew louder by the second. At this point, it wasn't just about getting through airport security. It was about being publicly humiliated. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Dwayne glanced down and saw a text message from his agent, Marcus. You okay? Heard something's going on at the airport. What's happening? Dwayne quickly typed a response. Long story. Just got kicked out of security. They think I'm someone else? Marcus's reply came almost instantly. WTF? I'll call the airport manager. Just stay put. But Dwayne didn't want to wait around. He didn't want to just sit by and watch as this spiraled. He had to understand what was happening. And more importantly, he needed answers. I'll leave, he said finally, his voice even but firm. But you need to tell me why I'm being treated like this. The security officer stared at him, the awkward silence dragging on. The crowd was still watching, still filming. There was no way they were letting him walk away quietly now. I'm sorry, sir, the officer said, but his apology lacked sincerity. We don't have the information you're asking for right now. Dwayne's eyes narrowed. You're telling me I'm not allowed to board my flight, and you don't even know who's making the call? You guys are taking me out of here because of a mistake, and you won't even tell me why. He could feel the tension in his chest, the frustration rising like a storm he couldn't control. This wasn't just about a simple security check anymore. This was about the system. The system that didn't care who you were or what you'd done. A system that, at that moment, had no regard for his humanity. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, and it burned. Another text pinged from Marcus. Just got off the phone with them. They say there's no record of you being on the flight. You need to go to the customer service desk. Dwayne stood there, trying to make sense of it all. No record? That didn't make any sense. He was booked, checked in, and had his boarding pass right there on his phone. All right, Dwayne said, standing straighter now, trying to regain some sense of control. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. The officers didn't stop him, but their watchful gazes followed every step as he walked toward the customer service desk. The crowd still followed, phones trained on his every move. Dwayne had no choice but to ignore the stares. He was beyond the point of caring about the attention. This wasn't about Hollywood anymore. This was about respect. At the desk, he was greeted by a woman who looked just as puzzled as he felt. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Oh my God, are you? Yes, I am, Dwayne interrupted gently, trying to keep his composure. But that's not important right now. What's going on? I've been told there's no record of my flight. I'm booked and checked in. This is the second time today that I've been given the runaround, and I need answers. The woman quickly checked her system, her fingers flying over the keyboard as her screen glowed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson. There's a glitch in the system today. It seems your flight details were flagged by our security team, and there was an error when trying to process your ticket. Dwayne exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the situation settle in. So, you're telling me this whole mess, this whole scene, it was a system error? The woman nodded, her face apologetic. Yes, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. You should have been cleared to board. Dwayne shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. A system error, huh? You know, sometimes life has a funny way of reminding you that no matter how big you think you are, you're still at the mercy of something as simple as a computer glitch. As the woman tried to explain further, Dwayne couldn't help but feel the absurdity of it all. A computer error? He'd been caught in the crossfire of something so trivial, and yet, it felt as though everything about his identity had been stripped away in that moment. He wasn't just being kicked off a flight, he was being forgotten. The woman at the desk continued apologizing, offering him a new boarding pass, but Dwayne felt detached. His mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the bigger picture. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a signal. Something bigger was brewing, and he wasn't going to let it slip by without understanding why. "I'm going to fix this," Dwayne said, as much to himself as to the woman in front of him. Little did he know, that decision would set off a chain of events that would change the course of everything. The feeling of being caught in the middle of an uncontrollable situation still hadn't left Dwayne as he stood at the customer service desk. A glitch in the system. That was the explanation he had been given. But something about it didn't sit right with him. This was no mere technical error. This felt like something deliberate. The way security had treated him, the way his identity was questioned, all of it felt off. As he stood there, the woman at the desk continued to offer apologies, but Dwayne's mind was racing, his thoughts churning. He needed to know more, to figure out why something so small had blown up into something this huge. "Look," Dwayne interrupted, leaning forward slightly, "I get it. Systems fail. But this doesn't feel like just a mistake. You said my flight was flagged. Can you tell me who flagged it? Who decided that I couldn't board?" The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. She glanced nervously at her screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if unsure whether to push the keys that would reveal something she wasn't supposed to know. "Ma'am," Dwayne's voice was calm, but firm, "you're not helping me by staying quiet." With a resigned sigh, she finally relented. It was flagged by the security team. They have the final say on who's allowed to enter the restricted areas, and they made the decision based on the information they had. The information they had? Dwayne repeated. "What information?" "I'm not entirely sure," she replied, shaking her head, her voice low. "I don't have access to the full details, but I can tell you that it was unusual, even for them. They don't typically flag someone unless there's a reason. A security risk, something like that." But what?" Dwayne pressed, sensing that there was more to the story. Her eyes flickered briefly to the side, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "There's been rumors, I guess. Something about a new security protocol, something that's been quietly rolled out. I don't know the details, but people are being flagged for no apparent reason. It's like they're trying to catch something before it happens." The word protocol caught his attention, and Dwayne's mind started to connect the dots. A new security measure? One that flagged people without explanation? The more he thought about it, the less it seemed like a coincidence. There was something larger at play, something that stretched beyond just an airport glitch or a routine error. "Who can I talk to about this?" Dwayne asked, his voice unwavering. "Someone who knows exactly what's going on here." The woman hesitated for a moment, her face racked with indecision. Then, she sighed and reluctantly scribbled a name and a number on a piece of paper. "This is the head of airport security, Mr. John Davies. He's the one who authorized the new protocol. Maybe he can explain it better." Dwayne took the paper, his fingers brushing over the contact details. He knew he had to get answers, and he needed to do it quickly before this whole situation escalated further. "Thank you," he said, turning away from the desk. But as he walked away, something gnawed at him. This wasn't just about getting on a flight anymore. This wasn't even about clearing his name. This was about something much bigger, and the more he learned, the more it seemed like he was being pulled into a web of something sinister. Dwayne made his way to a quieter corner of the airport, dialing the number the woman had given him. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Mr. Davies speaking," a deep voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Davies," Dwayne began, his tone professional but firm, "this is Dwayne Johnson. I'm trying to understand why I was flagged by your security team today. There seems to be some sort of misunderstanding, and I'm hoping you can clear this up for me." There was a pause on the other end, and Dwayne could almost hear the gears turning as the man processed the name. "Mr. Johnson, I'm familiar with your case," Davies said, his voice cautious. "We've been following your movements for a while now." Dwayne's blood ran cold. Following my movements? What do you mean by that? He asked, trying to keep the edge of panic from creeping into his voice. It's part of the new security measure, Davies explained, his tone almost mechanical. We've been tightening up security, and unfortunately, you got caught in the net. There's been some intelligence that suggests certain high-profile individuals might be vulnerable to exploitation or manipulation. We're just being cautious. Intelligence? Are you telling me you've been watching me? Based on what exactly? Dwayne's voice was rising now, anger bubbling under the surface. This didn't make sense. Davies' tone remained neutral. It's not personal, Mr. Johnson. It's a general precautionary measure. We've been monitoring several people, not just you, but others in the public eye. We had no reason to believe you were involved in anything illegal, but we couldn't take any chances. Dwayne's mind was spinning. A precautionary measure? Watching public figures for no reason? Who authorized this? Dwayne asked, his words now tight with disbelief. I can't give you specifics, Davies replied, his voice becoming more guarded. But the higher-ups are involved. This isn't just an airport policy. It's part of a broader initiative. Dwayne clenched his fists. This wasn't just a small mistake anymore. This was a coordinated effort, one that involved a system of surveillance and control. He wasn't just a celebrity caught in a bad situation. He was a piece in a much larger game. I want to speak to someone who can explain this in full, Dwayne said, his voice steady, but his resolve hardening. I'm not going to let this slide. I need answers. I understand your frustration, Mr. Johnson, Davies replied, but there was no real sympathy in his voice. But I can't promise you anything more than what I've already told you. I suggest you move on. The line went dead. Dwayne stood there, stunned, his heart pounding in his chest. It was becoming clear. Whatever was happening, it was much more than just a mistake. There was something deeply unsettling happening behind the scenes. The truth was just beginning to unfold, but Dwayne could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. This wasn't just an isolated incident anymore. The truth was far more dangerous, and Dwayne knew he was only scratching the surface. Dwayne stood still, the phone pressed to his ear long after Mr. Davies had hung up. The conversation felt like a trap, a warning that things were no longer as simple as he thought. He had been caught in the middle of something far beyond a simple airport inconvenience. A covert operation that seemed to be watching him, tracking him, and, most disturbingly, manipulating the information that others were seeing. But the biggest realization hit him then. This wasn't just happening to him. This was happening to a lot of people in the public eye, and it had been going on for far longer than anyone, even he, had noticed. He looked down at his phone and typed out a quick text to Marcus, his agent. Something's off. I need you to look into this. The security protocol I was flagged under. It's not a mistake. It's bigger. Get back to me. As the text sent, Dwayne felt the weight of everything settling into him. There were so many questions, so many gaps that were suddenly there, waiting for him to figure them out. Who was behind this? Why were they monitoring him and others like him? And most importantly, what did they want? He snapped himself out of the spiraling thoughts and looked around. The airport was the same, full of travelers hurrying to catch flights, families waving goodbye, the usual hum of people passing through. But to him, everything felt different. The way he saw the world had shifted. It was like discovering a hidden door that led into a dark, mysterious place, and now, he had to decide whether or not to walk through it. As he approached the seating area, Dwayne's eyes scanned the crowd. He spotted a man in a suit, his demeanor confident and controlled, talking to someone at a nearby kiosk. His presence stood out, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Dwayne felt a strange pull toward the man. Something about him seemed out of place in the otherwise normal environment. The man glanced up and caught Dwayne's eye. Their gazes locked for a moment, and Dwayne could feel the tension rising in his chest. This man, whoever he was, knew more about the situation than he was letting on. He was part of it, part of whatever game was being played. Dwayne didn't wait. He walked directly toward him. The man didn't flinch as Dwayne approached. Instead, he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated, like he had been expecting this moment. Mr. Johnson, the man said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "I've been hoping to meet you. Who are you?" Dwayne's voice was firm, every muscle in his body tense, ready for whatever came next. The man extended a hand. "My name is Robert Grayson. I'm with a private security firm. We've been monitoring a number of public figures, and I must say, it's been interesting watching your evolution." There was something unsettling about the way he said it, as if Dwayne had been some kind of project for him. Dwayne didn't take his hand. "I'm not interested in your games. I want to know why I was flagged at this airport. What's going on?" Grayson's smile didn't fade. "I can't give you all the answers, Mr. Johnson. But I can tell you that this protocol you've encountered is just the beginning. You're part of something much bigger than you realize." Dwayne's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? What is this? Surveillance? Security measures? Or something else?" Grayson's eyes glinted with a knowing look. "It's a form of control, Mr. Johnson. It's the future of how we, as a society, manage information, influence, and, ultimately, power. People like you, celebrities, influencers, the people the public watches, you're all part of a system that others can control. That's why we've been watching, to ensure that everything stays in line." Dwayne's mind raced. "You're telling me this is about controlling public figures? About controlling the narrative?" Grayson nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "Exactly. You're being monitored, tracked, and flagged not because you've done anything wrong, but because you have the power to shape public opinion, to influence millions. And when that kind of power is in the hands of a few, it's dangerous. This is about controlling the narrative before it even starts." The air felt thick with the weight of Grayson's words. It was a truth Dwayne wasn't sure he was ready to accept, but it hit him hard. This wasn't just about being famous, about playing a role in movies or wrestling anymore. It was about something far more sinister. "Why me? Why all these other people?" Dwayne demanded. "Because you're influential, Mr. Johnson," Grayson said, his tone shifting, almost admiring. "You've built a brand that stands for strength, resilience, and success. But those traits can be dangerous if used incorrectly. They want to make sure that everything you say and do is in line with the greater plan." A cold shiver ran down Dwayne's spine. The thought of being manipulated, being part of someone else's game, made his blood boil. He wasn't a puppet. He was Dwayne Johnson, a man who'd fought hard for everything he had, who'd earned every bit of respect and love from his fans. "So what now?" Dwayne asked, his voice low but intense. "What happens if I don't play along? If I decide I'm not going to follow your rules?" Grayson's smile turned more cynical. "That's the thing, Mr. Johnson. You don't have a choice anymore. No one does." With that, Grayson turned and began walking away, leaving Dwayne standing there, his heart pounding in his chest. It felt like a punch to the gut, like his whole world had been flipped upside down in an instant. Dwayne took a moment, breathing deeply as he processed everything. It was clear now. He had been drawn into something far bigger than he ever imagined. A system, a web of control, monitoring the most powerful figures in the world. But Dwayne wasn't the kind of man who would roll over and let someone control his life. Not without a fight. This wasn't just about getting kicked out of an airport. This was about standing up to a force that wanted to use him. And he wasn't going to let that happen. "Not on my watch," he muttered to himself, determination setting in. "I'm going to bring this down." Dwayne's mind was racing as he stood there in the airport, the weight of everything Grayson had said sinking in. The whole situation felt surreal, like he had been thrust into a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. He had spent his career being an open book, being the person people looked up to, and now, here he was, caught in the middle of a shadowy world of surveillance, control, and manipulation. His phone buzzed again. Marcus' name appeared on the screen. Dwayne quickly swiped to answer. "Dwayne, you okay?" Marcus' voice came through with the familiar sound of concern. "I've been going through the information. I've got something." "Tell me," Dwayne said, his voice tight. "I've been digging through the system. Turns out, this so-called protocol is part of a larger initiative. This isn't just happening at airports. It's been rolled out across the country. It's a government-backed operation. They've been monitoring people in your position, celebrities, influencers, political figures. It's about shaping narratives and controlling the public's perception. Dwayne's chest tightened. He'd heard it from Grayson, but hearing it from Marcus, someone he trusted, made it feel even more real. They've been watching everyone? Dwayne asked, disbelief in his voice. Not just watching, Marcus continued. They've been manipulating things behind the scenes. They control what gets seen and what doesn't. You've been caught in the middle of it, Dwayne. And it's not just happening to you. It's happening to all the people who are in the public eye. Dwayne's mind was spinning, but a sense of clarity began to settle over him. He wasn't just a victim in this. He could fight back. He had the power to do something about it. It was his moment to make a choice. I'm not going down like this, Marcus, Dwayne said, his voice steady with determination. I'm going to expose this. I'm going to take them down. Marcus hesitated for a moment. Dwayne, be careful. These people are dangerous. They have resources, power, and control. If you're going after them, it's not just about you anymore. You're going to be putting everything at risk. Dwayne took a deep breath, looking out over the terminal. He could see families boarding flights, couples walking hand in hand, children laughing. They all seemed oblivious to the hidden truths that were unfolding in the background, the systems that controlled them, the forces that were watching every move they made. But the truth was, everyone was being affected, even if they didn't know it. I've never been afraid of risks, Dwayne replied, his jaw tightening. I've spent my life pushing through obstacles, fighting against the odds. And this is the biggest fight of my life. I won't stand by and let them control me. Not now, not ever. Marcus sighed on the other end of the line. Just promise me you'll be smart about it. You're not alone in this, Dwayne. We've got people who can help. Dwayne nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see him. I'll take every step carefully, but I won't stop. They can't win. The line went silent for a moment, and Dwayne's thoughts started to shift. The decision had been made. He couldn't walk away from this. Not now that he knew the truth. It wasn't just about exposing a secret. It was about fighting for the freedom of everyone who had been unknowingly manipulated by this hidden agenda. The next step was clear. He needed to gather the right people, those who could help him uncover everything. He would need allies, those who were just as determined as he was to take down the system. He left the airport with a heavy heart, but a renewed sense of purpose. His mind was already moving toward the next step, a plan to expose the truth. He didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but he knew that he couldn't sit back and let this injustice continue. As he drove back to his hotel, Dwayne reflected on everything that had led him here. All his life, he had been pushing against boundaries, breaking through barriers. Whether it was as a wrestler, an actor, or a businessman, he had always been a fighter. But this was different. This wasn't about physical strength or being the toughest person in the room. This was about a battle of wits, a battle for the truth. The days ahead were going to be challenging. He knew that. But Dwayne also knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone control him. Not now, not ever. The sun had set by the time Dwayne arrived at his hotel. His phone buzzed with messages from his team. He quickly sifted through them, reading over Marcus notes, texts from his publicist, and a few random messages from friends offering their support. But his mind was elsewhere, focused on the bigger picture. He stood at the window of his hotel room, looking out over the city. The lights below twinkled, a reflection of the life that he had lived so far. Bright, bold, always in the public eye. But now, the darkness of what he had discovered seemed to shadow everything he had thought he understood about his life, his work, and his legacy. There were so many questions swirling in his mind. What had he truly been a part of all these years? How deep did the system run? What was the end game? But there was no time for answers just yet. For now, he had to prepare. He had to gather his allies, find the right people who could expose the truth, and prepare for the battle of his life. And when the time came, Dwayne would bring everything he had. This fight was far from over. Dwayne knew that the hardest part of this fight wouldn't be the physical challenges. He had faced enough of those in his career. This time, it was about trust, strategy, and playing the long game. The forces he was up against were hidden in the shadows, operating behind closed doors. He couldn't just take them down by himself. He needed allies, and he needed the right ones. The next morning, he called Marcus. They had talked briefly the night before, But Dwayne felt it was time to get serious. He needed a team that wasn't just reactive but could help him anticipate every move. "Marcus, I've been thinking," Dwayne said, his voice steady. "We need to build a team, people who can help us uncover the truth and fight back. This isn't just about exposing the system anymore. It's about dismantling it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing what Dwayne had just said. "You're right. You're going to need more than just your usual team. We'll need experts, tech people, journalists, legal minds, anyone who has the resources to help us navigate this mess." Dwayne nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see him. "Exactly. But it's not just about skills. I need people who can think on their feet, people who aren't afraid to take risks. We need a team that's ready for this war." Marcus let out a low sigh. "You've got it, Dwayne. I've got some contacts I trust, people who can help. But this is going to be a tough road. You know that, right?" Dwayne's voice was unwavering. "I've never backed down from a challenge in my life, and I'm not about to start now." Within the next few days, Dwayne and Marcus worked tirelessly, reaching out to key people who could be valuable assets in their mission. They needed hackers who could infiltrate the system, investigative journalists who weren't afraid to dig deep, and lawyers who could protect them from the legal backlash that was inevitable. It was a delicate balancing act. Dwayne had built his career on public trust, and now, the world around him felt like it was crumbling. The people he was turning to were just as aware of the risks as he was. The stakes were higher than anything Dwayne had ever faced before. One by one, the team began to take shape. First, there was Olivia, a brilliant hacker who had once worked for a cybersecurity firm. She was sharp, resourceful, and had a reputation for getting through the most impenetrable systems. She was also one of the few people Dwayne trusted with the sensitive information that had been surfacing over the past few days. Then, there was Noah, a journalist with a reputation for digging up stories that no one else dared to touch. He had a knack for uncovering government secrets and corporate corruption, and that made him a valuable ally. Dwayne had worked with Noah on a few philanthropic projects, and they had developed a strong mutual respect for one another. Finally, there was Zoe, a tenacious lawyer who had worked on several high-profile cases involving whistleblowers and corporate cover-ups. She had a reputation for being unshakable in the face of threats, and Dwayne knew she was the kind of person who would fight back against the system, no matter how powerful it was. "All right," Dwayne said as he gathered them together in a secure location. "This is bigger than any of us. We've all been chosen because we have the skills and the determination to bring this system to light. We're not just exposing a conspiracy. We're taking down a machine that's been manipulating people for years. I need each of you to give it everything you've got." Olivia, sitting at the table, cracked her knuckles and smiled. "I've been waiting for a challenge like this." Noah looked at Dwayne with a steady gaze. "I've seen corruption before, but this is next level." Zoe folded her arms and nodded. "I don't back down from a fight, especially when it's about justice." Dwayne looked around the room at the people who would stand by him in this fight. Each one had their own reason for being there, but they all shared one thing: a commitment to truth, no matter the cost. The first step in their plan was to infiltrate the data behind the surveillance system. Olivia was already on it, working late into the night to hack into the database that was being used to monitor public figures. The system wasn't easy to crack, but Olivia had a way of making the impossible seem manageable. "We've got access," Olivia said the next day, her voice tinged with excitement. "I'm in. Now we just need to start digging." They spent the next few days combing through the data, looking for patterns, connections, anything that could shed light on how deep this operation went. It was slow, tedious work, but they were getting closer. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how far-reaching the system was. Meanwhile, Noah had begun reaching out to his network of journalists. They were working together to piece together the bigger story, one that would expose not just the surveillance but the broader agenda behind it. There were stories to be told, stories that had been buried under layers of manipulation and control. Zoe, on the legal front, was preparing for the inevitable fallout. She knew that once the truth came out, there would be legal challenges. But Zoe was prepared for a fight. If there was one thing she knew, it was how to fight the system. Dwayne spent every spare moment thinking about what was at stake. The people who had built this system of control weren't just powerful, they were dangerous. They would do anything to protect their secrets. And Dwayne knew that they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who stood in their way. As he sat at a table with his team, reviewing the data Olivia had uncovered, Dwayne couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. The battle had only just begun. They had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but the truth was still out of reach. "Listen," Dwayne said, his voice sharp, "we're just getting started. I know this is risky. I know they'll try to stop us. But we've come this far, and we're not backing down. We're going to expose them, and we're going to make sure everyone knows what's really been going on." His words were met with nods of agreement, each team member driven by the same goal, the truth. As the days stretched on, the pressure of the mission began to weigh heavily on everyone. Dwayne could feel it, the anticipation of something big coming, the tension that hung thick in the air. They were moving closer to the heart of the operation, and that meant they had to act soon. The clock was ticking, and they were running out of time before the system they were fighting against moved to shut them down. Dwayne stood in front of a giant whiteboard in the team's makeshift war room. A map of the country spread out across it, dotted with red circles marking locations where they'd found significant traces of the covert operation. Olivia had unearthed data suggesting that the surveillance program wasn't just tracking individuals. It was manipulating outcomes, planting false information, and subtly shaping the way people viewed their world. Noah had been digging into the stories, but he needed more. Hard, undeniable proof that could expose the truth to the public. Zoe had prepared a legal framework to protect them, but Dwayne knew they were all walking on a razor's edge. One wrong move, and they could all lose everything. "We need something big," Dwayne said, his voice breaking the silence. "Something that'll force them to react. Something that'll make it impossible for them to cover up." Olivia leaned forward, her fingers running through her hair as she scanned the data on her laptop. "I think I've found it." Dwayne's heart skipped a beat. "What's that?" She looked up, her face set with a determination that mirrored his. "I found the communication line they used to coordinate the surveillance. It's a backdoor system buried deep in a federal database. But it's there. And if we can access it, we can expose everything. Every name, every connection, every piece of this puzzle." Noah, who had been sitting in the corner reviewing documents, stood up with a grin. "That's it. We get that data. We break the story wide open. The media won't be able to ignore it." Zoe crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing with focus. "This could be the break we need. But it's not going to be easy. If we try to access that kind of system, they'll know we're coming. They'll lock it down before we get anywhere." Dwayne nodded. "We can't waste time. If we pull this off, we have to make sure the information gets to the right people. The public, the authorities, the press. We need the world to see what's been happening behind closed doors." Olivia looked down at her laptop. "I can get in, but we need to move fast. It's a live system, constantly changing. One wrong move, and it's game over." Dwayne paced the room, his mind working over the plan. He knew that the team had to be in sync, that every step had to be calculated. This wasn't just a matter of hacking into a computer system. This was about exposing a massive conspiracy, and that meant dealing with the consequences, not just for him, but for everyone involved. "I trust you," Dwayne said, looking directly at Olivia. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." Hours later, they were ready. Olivia sat at her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she worked her way into the backdoor system. The room was silent except for the hum of the computers and the occasional click of a mouse. Dwayne stood behind her, watching the screen as Olivia carefully navigated the intricate layers of security. The seconds ticked by, feeling like minutes, and the tension in the room thickened. "We're almost there," Olivia muttered under her breath. "Just a few more steps." Dwayne's heart raced. He could feel the eyes of his team on him, waiting, watching, hoping. If this worked, it would be a game changer. But if it didn't, his mind snapped back to the present as Olivia's fingers froze. "I'm in," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but Dwayne could tell the adrenaline was coursing through her veins. She began pulling up documents, files, and records, each one revealing more about the surveillance program, its scope, its power, and its chilling control over the lives of countless individuals. "This is it," Olivia said, her voice low but filled with awe. "Everything's here. The full operation, the names of those involved. It's all documented. Noah stepped forward, peering over her shoulder at the screen. This is more than we could have hoped for. With this, we can blow the lid off the whole thing. Zoe was already making notes. I'll start preparing the legal documents we need to back this up. Once we release this information, we're going to need all the legal protection we can get. Dwayne stood there for a moment, his mind racing. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, but the gravity of what they were about to do settled over him. Once the world knew the truth, there would be no turning back. The system would retaliate, and it would retaliate hard. We release this tonight, Dwayne said, his voice resolute. But we don't just release it in one place. We get it to every journalist, every outlet, every person we can. This information needs to spread like wildfire. Olivia nodded, her fingers moving faster now. I'll send it to the key contacts in the media. It's going to be everywhere, I promise you. Hours passed as they prepared for the release. They encrypted the data, secured their tracks, and worked through every possible detail. They had a plan in place for how the information would be distributed, how they would keep the authorities at bay, and how they would protect themselves from any retaliation. As the sun began to set, Dwayne stood by the window, looking out at the city lights below. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, for better or for worse. But there was no going back now. This is it, Dwayne said quietly to himself. The first strike. The beginning of the end. As the team finalized their preparations, Dwayne couldn't help but think about the people who would be affected by this information. They were about to tear down a system that had been built in the shadows. A system that had been manipulating the lives of millions. And he was leading the charge. The moment the information was released, the world changed. The first wave of articles, videos, and social media posts hit within minutes, all pointing to the massive government surveillance program that had been operating under the radar for years. People were shocked, enraged, and confused. The public was suddenly aware of the extent to which they'd been watched, manipulated, and controlled. Dwayne sat in the makeshift command center with his team, watching the chaos unfold on the screens in front of him. News outlets began to pick up the story, and it spread like wildfire. Tweets, blog posts, and Instagram stories began circulating the data, names, locations, covert meetings, everything. The truth was out. But even as he watched the revolution he had helped spark take shape, Dwayne couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at him. It was one thing to expose the system. It was another to face the consequences of doing so. This is it, Marcus said, standing beside him. You did it. We did it. But Dwayne didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. He couldn't afford to. He watched as the authorities scrambled to respond, trying to suppress the leak and minimize the damage. They couldn't stop it, not anymore. The truth was like a wildfire, unstoppable, burning through the lies they had carefully constructed. And then came the counterattack. The first wave was subtle, untraceable attempts to discredit the team. Social media accounts began to target them, labeling them as conspiracy theorists or attention seekers. Slips of misinformation were leaked into the public consciousness. The news cycle tried to bury the real story, preferring to focus on the small missteps, the blurry details that could be used to undermine the credibility of their findings. Dwayne felt the pressure of it all. They were up against more than just a broken system. They were up against a network of people who had all the resources in the world to protect their secrets. Where's Noah? Dwayne asked, turning to his team. He's working on securing the media's attention, Zoe replied, her eyes glued to her phone. But we need to brace ourselves for the backlash. The authorities are already circling, trying to discredit us. They won't let this slide. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. Dwayne had known this was coming. The threats, the smear campaigns, the risks to his personal life. But now that it was happening, it felt different. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about the people he loved. His family, his friends, everyone he cared about was suddenly at risk. His phone buzzed, and Dwayne immediately picked it up. It was a message from his ex-wife, Lauren. Dwayne, I just saw what's happening. Are you okay? The kids, they're asking questions. They don't understand. Please tell me you're all right. He stared at the message for a long time, the words hanging in the air like an anchor. Dwayne had always tried to protect his family from the chaos of his life. But now it seemed like that protection had shattered. The ripple effect of his decision to expose the truth was reaching far beyond him. It was hitting the people he loved the most. "Do you think this will end well?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice a mix of concern and exhaustion. Dwayne's jaw clenched as he typed a quick response to Lauren. "We'll be okay. Stay safe. I'm doing what I have to do." He hit send and tossed his phone onto the table, then turned back to his team. "We can't let up. We can't let them control the narrative." Olivia, who had been scanning the news, looked up. "The leaks are already starting to come out. The higher-ups are panicking. They're scrambling to make sure their names aren't attached to this." "We have to hold steady," Dwayne said, his voice firm. "We've just lit a match. Now we make sure it burns." For the next few days, the situation escalated. The news cycle was consumed by the revelations, but with every new piece of information, the opposition grew more aggressive. The public began to split into two camps, those who believed the truth and those who refused to accept it. Some people rallied behind Dwayne and his team, calling for justice, while others chose to ignore the facts, dismissing the entire thing as a political maneuver or an overblown conspiracy. But the backlash against Dwayne was the hardest to bear. The personal attacks on his character grew harsher by the day. His reputation, built over years of hard work, was being ripped apart by those in power who were desperate to maintain control. His past was being re-examined. Everything from his early wrestling career to his Hollywood persona. They were trying to strip away his credibility, to paint him as nothing more than a tool in a larger scheme. And then, the threat came. Dwayne was sitting in his hotel room, reviewing documents, when a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. He knew something was coming. But this? He wasn't prepared for this. He opened the door to find Zoe standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with urgency. "We've got a problem," she said, her voice tight with fear. "What's happened?" Dwayne asked, his stomach tightening. "They've gone after the team. They found some of Olivia's connections, and they've already taken down one of our safe houses. The backup data's been compromised. We're being tracked, Dwayne." The blood drained from his face. "What do you mean, compromised?" "They know who we are. They're coming for us." Dwayne's mind raced. This was the point he had been dreading. They had known the risks, but the reality of being hunted was something else entirely. "I won't let them win," Dwayne said, a deep resolve settling in his chest. "We need to get to the next phase, the moment we expose everything. We don't stop until the truth is everywhere." Zoe nodded. "But we need to move fast. They're already looking for weaknesses, for cracks in the system. If we don't act now, we might not get another chance." Anderson stood in front of his team, every ounce of energy focused on the task at hand. "They want to silence us. They think they can control the narrative. But we won't let them." He paused, looking each person in the eye. "We've made it this far. We're not stopping now." The world was teetering on the edge of chaos. Every moment felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something monumental, a battle that was now far bigger than any of them had imagined. The fight to expose the truth had gone from a calculated risk to a full-blown war. Dwayne had known from the beginning that there was no easy way out, but the weight of the stakes was heavier than he could have ever prepared for. They had just hours before the next wave of government-backed attempts to silence them would hit. The tension was thick in the air, and Dwayne could see it in his team's faces. Fear, doubt, but also a shared sense of determination. They had come too far to back down now. And this time, Dwayne was not just fighting for the truth. He was fighting for his family, for the future, and for everyone who had been manipulated by the system they were trying to take down. "We don't have much time," Zoe said, standing by the door. She had been working tirelessly on the legal side, trying to cover their backs while they exposed the truth. "Once this goes public, the fallout will be immediate. We need to have a clear path to make sure we're protected." Dwayne nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't focus on the legalities anymore. They had prepared for those. The truth was too far out now, and it would be impossible to stop the wheels from turning. What mattered now was making sure it stayed in motion. "Olivia," he said, turning to her. Can you ensure that everything we've got gets out to every media outlet we've set up? Olivia, her eyes bloodshot from days of relentless work, looked up from her laptop. It's ready. Everything's encrypted, everything's in place. All we need is the push. Then let's do it, Dwayne said. Release it. Every outlet. Every person we've reached. It's time to show the world what they've been hiding. The team scattered to their posts, each one focused on their role, each one knowing that they were crossing a point of no return. Olivia tapped a few final keys, her hands steady despite the pressure, and with a deep breath, hit send. The floodgates were opened. The data began flooding the internet, infiltrating social media, news channels, and even private emails. The information went out in waves, revealing the extent of the surveillance system that had quietly invaded their lives for years. Names, locations, contracts, coded messages, all of it was laid bare for the world to see. Within minutes, the impact was immediate. The phone lines lit up. Social media erupted. Public officials scrambled, trying to stem the tide, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The chaos was unimaginable. News outlets were bombarded with questions, interviews, and debates. The internet was ablaze with hashtags calling for accountability and justice. Dwayne's name, once associated only with Hollywood action and wrestling, was now synonymous with resistance, with bravery, with standing up against a system that had abused its power for far too long. But there was a dark side to this success. The backlash had already begun. Dwayne's ex-wife Lauren texted him again, her message urgent. You're all over the news. The kids are scared. Please, Dwayne, come home. Please. This is bigger than you. It's too dangerous. Dwayne's heart sank as he read the message. He had promised to keep them safe, but now he had put them in the middle of this storm. His first instinct was to pick up the phone, to call her and reassure her. But he couldn't. Not now. Not while the battle was still raging. He looked over at Marcus, who had been following the news reports with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. They're trying to bury the story, Marcus said, shaking his head. They're already pushing out counter-narratives. But the public is waking up, Dwayne. It's happening. They can't stop it. Dwayne didn't respond immediately. His mind was too consumed with the enormity of what was unfolding. But then, slowly, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He had risked everything. His career, his family, even his freedom. To expose the truth. And for what? To take down a system built on lies and control. But as the story spread, as the calls for justice grew louder, he realized that it was worth it. Every piece of data, every name that had been revealed, every piece of evidence that had shaken the foundation of the system, it was worth it. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about giving people a voice, a chance at real freedom. The days that followed were a blur. There were meetings with journalists, legal experts, and even government officials who had reached out to learn more, to try to contain the damage. Some sought to silence Dwayne. Others wanted to use the information to fuel their own agendas. But Dwayne stood firm, knowing that this was the moment he had worked for. This was the moment where everything changed. As the weeks passed, the public began to push back against the system that had once controlled them. Protests erupted in the streets. People rallied in support of Dwayne and the team, demanding transparency and accountability. The government was forced to respond. Investigations were launched, and people at the highest levels of power began to feel the heat. But Dwayne knew that this was only the beginning. The real work, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, ensuring that those in power were held accountable, was still ahead. The truth had come out, but now it was time to face the long road to recovery. One night, Dwayne stood outside, looking up at the stars. The weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy on his shoulders, but there was a sense of peace, too. He had done the right thing, and no matter what happened next, he knew that he had made a difference. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Zoe. Dwayne, I know things are tough right now, but we're making history. We did it. This is only the beginning. Dwayne smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. We did it, he thought. And we're not stopping now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's your takeaway from this journey? Do you think the world is ready to fight for the truth, or is it easier to hide behind the lies? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to keep pushing for what's right. The whirlwind of the past few weeks had left Dwayne feeling like a man caught between two worlds. On one hand, they had achieved the impossible. They had shattered a massive conspiracy, brought the truth to light, and sparked a revolution of thought across the globe. On the other hand, the toll had been immense. His family, his friends, and even the people he didn't know personally were caught in the ripples of his actions. Some were supportive, others fearful, and many had just been caught off guard. The once quiet chaos of the mission was now replaced by the storm of a world that had woken up. Protests continued in the streets. Lawyers, politicians, and activists were discussing the details of the surveillance program, and major corporations that had been involved in its operation were scrambling to cover their tracks. The media was still abuzz with interviews, investigations, and updates. Dwayne was now a public figure in a way he'd never anticipated. He wasn't just the former wrestler or the actor who could light up a blockbuster screen. He was the man who had challenged the system, the man who had risked everything to expose the hidden truths of a corrupt world. But as the days wore on, a deep exhaustion settled into his bones. It wasn't just the physical toll. It was the mental and emotional weight of knowing that even though they had won, the battle was far from over. It was early morning when Dwayne found himself sitting in his hotel room, alone, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The phone calls from his ex-wife had continued, and now, even his kids had started reaching out to him. "Why did you have to do this, Dad?" his son had asked him during their last call. His daughter, too, had been confused and scared. It was in moments like these, when he was alone with his thoughts, that the reality hit hardest. Dwayne had made this choice, and he would live with it, but it was more than just the consequences on him. It was the ripples that affected those he loved. "Dad, do you think the world will ever be the same?" his son had asked, and that question had stayed with him ever since. The weight of his answer lingered in the room. "I hope so," he whispered, even if he didn't quite believe it. But he had to hold on to hope. If he didn't, then all of this would have been for nothing. As Dwayne sat in silence, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Marcus. "We need to talk. There's been a shift. They're preparing to try and regain control. It's already started." Dwayne rubbed his temples and sighed. Just when he thought they might catch their breath, the forces they were up against were making their next move. The battle was far from over. The next morning, Dwayne met with his team. The atmosphere in the room was quieter than usual. Everyone had seen the media storm and the growing tension. The people they had once trusted, the institutions that had appeared stable, were now revealing their true intentions, trying to regain control of the narrative. Some were outright calling for legal action against Dwayne and his team. Others were threatening to discredit them further. But Dwayne knew one thing for sure. They had started something, and they weren't going to stop until it was finished. "I can't promise you things will be easy," Dwayne said, standing before his team. "But we've already pushed the boundaries, and now we have to hold our ground." Olivia, who had become an even stronger pillar for the team since the release of the data, spoke up. "We knew this wouldn't be a walk in the park. We knew the opposition wouldn't just roll over. But we have the truth on our side, and we can't let them take that from us. We have to keep pushing." Zoe, ever the strategist, was already thinking ahead. "We need to stay ahead of them. This next phase will be crucial. They're going to come after us in ways we haven't even considered yet. We need to be prepared for every possible angle." Dwayne looked at them all, Olivia, Zoe, Marcus, Noah, and realized that they had all been through so much together. They had become more than a team. They had become a family, bound together by the desire for justice, for transparency, and for change. "We're in this together," Dwayne said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "And we're not backing down." Over the next few weeks, the team focused on securing their positions, building alliances with whistleblowers, journalists, and lawyers who were willing to take risks alongside them. They worked tirelessly to ensure that the information they had released wasn't buried or discredited. It was a tense, uncertain time, but Dwayne knew that they couldn't afford to falter. Behind the scenes, Dwayne also spent time reaching out to his family. He apologized to Lauren and promised that he would do everything he could to protect them from the fallout. The reality was that he couldn't shield them from the consequences forever, but he would try his best. His children, too, were still processing everything, but he knew he needed to be there for them, no matter how long it took for the storm to pass. But it wasn't just his family he was fighting for anymore. The ripple effect of the story had reached every corner of the globe. People who had felt powerless, those who had lived in fear, were starting to speak out. They were demanding transparency. They were demanding change. And, for the first time in a long while, Dwayne felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. This wasn't just a fight to expose a broken system. It was a fight to restore the trust that had been stolen from the people, to give them back their power. One night, Dwayne stood at the edge of a rooftop, overlooking the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of how much still needed to be done. But for the first time, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt ready. Ready to keep fighting. Ready to face whatever came next. "I've been thinking about everything," he said to Marcus, who had joined him on the rooftop. "You've had a lot to think about," Marcus replied, his tone gentle. "I don't know what the world will look like after all of this. I don't know if things will ever go back to normal. But I do know this. We've made a difference. And we're not stopping now." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've already changed the game, Dwayne. Whatever happens next, we've already won." The battle wasn't over, but the seeds of change had been planted. Dwayne knew that they had made a powerful impact, and no matter how hard the forces of corruption fought back, the truth was out. The system had been exposed, and there was no putting it back together again. As he walked back inside, Dwayne felt a deep sense of purpose settle within him. He had started this journey not knowing where it would lead, but now he understood. It was about more than just one man's fight against a broken system. It was about restoring the trust of a world that had forgotten what it meant to be free. And that, he thought, was a cause worth fighting for. It had been weeks since the explosive release of the surveillance data. The world was still buzzing with the reverberations, but the loudest noise had faded. The news cycles had moved on to other stories, and yet, the undercurrent of unrest was still palpable. Dwayne felt the shift, the collective holding of breath. It was as if everyone, from world leaders to ordinary citizens, was waiting for the next big move. No one was quite sure how to respond, but everyone knew something was coming. For Dwayne, the calm was unsettling. He had come to expect the rush of adrenaline, the constant fight to keep ahead of the system they had exposed. Now, everything felt like it was building up to something much larger than anything they had already experienced. What came next was the million-dollar question. He leaned back in the chair in the meeting room, rubbing his temples. His team had gathered again, each of them looking just as worn out as he felt. But they were ready. Dwayne could see it in their eyes. They had made it through the chaos, and now they were prepared to weather whatever storm was about to hit. "All right," he said, breaking the silence. "We're not just waiting anymore. We know what's coming. We have to be strategic." Olivia, ever the analyst, spoke first. "The data's out. We've opened the doors, but now they're scrambling. The government is taking a more subtle approach. They're trying to pass laws that would grant them more power to silence people like us. There are already talks of censoring the information we released. We need to double down on our efforts," Zoe added, her voice firm. "We can't afford to let the momentum slip. People are waking up, but they need more than just a couple of leaks. They need tangible evidence, something that can't be dismissed. We need to make sure the world knows this wasn't just a one-off whistleblowing moment." Dwayne nodded. "Exactly. We need to hit them where it hurts, but we also need to be careful. One wrong move, and they'll turn the narrative against us. We have to stay ahead." The room fell silent for a moment as each member of the team processed the gravity of what was being said. The plan wasn't just about getting the truth out anymore. It was about securing the future of the movement they had started. Marcus was the next to speak, his tone cautious but resolute. "We need to find the right people who can keep the pressure on. Journalists, activists, lawmakers who are willing to stand with us. The key is to build a coalition, to make this an unstoppable force. If we just go it alone, they'll isolate us. If we bring the world into this, we can't be silenced." Dwayne looked at each of them. "We've come this far, and we can't let up." But I need everyone to understand. This next phase is going to be different. It's not just about exposing the system anymore. It's about changing it. It's about making sure this never happens again. The team worked late into the night, planning their next steps. They reviewed all of the evidence they had compiled, deciding what to release next and what could be used as leverage in the negotiations they were preparing for. They were no longer just a group of whistleblowers. They had become symbols of a larger movement for truth, transparency, and justice. Meanwhile, Dwayne spent hours making calls to political allies, to journalists, and to people who had the power to influence the conversation. Every conversation, every negotiation, felt like a delicate dance. He had always been good at controlling a narrative, but this was different. This wasn't a movie script or a public persona to maintain. This was real life, and real life had consequences. As the days passed, the pressure started to mount again. Rumors of retaliatory actions swirled. There were whispers of possible lawsuits, possible arrests, and even worse, attempts to discredit everything they had worked for. But Dwayne had made up his mind. They couldn't stop now. Do you think it'll ever be enough? Zoe asked him one night, as they reviewed some of the press coverage. Dwayne looked over at her, feeling the weight of her question. I don't know, but if we stop now, we'll never know how much of a difference we can make. We've already opened people's eyes. The real question is, will they keep their eyes open long enough to see it through? The pressure wasn't just coming from outside anymore. Inside, Dwayne's thoughts were increasingly clouded. He had to keep the balance between his fight for justice and the life that had once been his, the life that seemed like a distant memory now. The calls from his family hadn't stopped. His children were still confused, still worried. And Lauren, his ex-wife, continued to plead with him to reconsider. Each message was a reminder of the human cost of his actions. They were safe, but for how long? One evening, he sat by himself, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls he was too tired to answer. The loneliness of the situation crept in. In a way, he had always lived in a bubble, surrounded by wealth, fame, and a carefully crafted persona. Now, the bubble had burst. The world was no longer a place where he could just turn off and escape. It was a harsh reality, but it was also one he had prepared himself for. He had chosen this fight. There would be no going back. The next day, Dwayne gathered his team again for a final round of planning. Everything they had done up to this point had been groundwork. But now, it was time to make their biggest move yet. We're going to take this global, he said, a new resolve in his voice. The leaks we've exposed so far have made waves, but they're just the start. We need to get this information into the hands of every major media outlet, every journalist, every government watchdog. If we can get the right people on our side, we can make sure this doesn't get buried. Zoe nodded. We have to be strategic about this. It's not just about flooding the media with information. It's about making sure that we build the right narrative. We need allies who can protect us. We'll need to be smart about it, Marcus said. The opposition will try to turn public sentiment against us. We have to make sure we're always one step ahead. We can't let them control the story. Dwayne agreed. Exactly. This is the final push. But it'll take all of us. We've already shaken things up. Now, it's time to make sure we finish what we started. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was on the horizon. The storm had yet to hit, but the signs were there. This wasn't just about exposing one government program anymore. This was about exposing the entire system that had been built to control the people. He looked out the window at the city below, knowing that the moment he'd been waiting for was finally here. The world was ready for change, and it was his job to help lead the charge. The days following their strategic meeting felt like a blur. Dwayne's team had become a well-oiled machine, moving in different directions, each member working on their own set of contacts, allies, and networks. Their goal was clear. They needed to bring more powerful players into the fold to protect the integrity of their mission. The truth had already been exposed, but to ensure that it stayed in the public eye, they would need the media, influential figures, and global support. This wasn't a fight that could be won by a few people alone. It was a battle that required a coalition. For the first time in a while, Dwayne felt something close to hope. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. There were others who believed in what he was doing, others who saw the bigger picture. Marcus had worked tirelessly, reaching out to influential journalists and investigative reporters who had covered similar scandals in the past. He'd forged relationships with whistleblowers from multiple sectors, all of whom had inside knowledge of corrupt systems that were ripe for exposure. "Got something for you," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table to Dwayne one afternoon. Dwayne looked at the contents, a list of high-profile names, each one an individual or group who could add weight to their cause. These weren't just activists. These were respected journalists, public figures, and leaders of social movements who had already built credibility in their fields. If they got these people on board, the narrative would have more than just a fighting chance. It would have momentum. "We can't just make this about us anymore," Dwayne said, flipping through the pages. "We need to show the world that this isn't just a lone crusade. It's a movement." Olivia, who had been overseeing the team's communication efforts, nodded in agreement. "We've been receiving messages from all over the world. People are hungry for change. We just need to give them a way to make their voices heard." "I'll get in touch with some of these people," Marcus said, "but we need to move fast. The opposition is already on the offensive. If we don't get the right people speaking up soon, they might seize control of the narrative." The pressure was mounting. It wasn't just about organizing the team or securing their own safety anymore. The stakes had escalated. With each new leak and every public statement Dwayne made, the opposition had grown more aggressive. The government was actively trying to discredit them, pushing back with smear campaigns and legal threats. But Dwayne wasn't backing down. Olivia had put together a list of public platforms where they could gain traction. Interviews, podcasts, social media events. They needed to show that they were both united and unwavering. Every new appearance, every new statement, was part of the larger picture they were painting. "You think people are still listening?" Zoe asked one evening as they reviewed the latest media coverage. "They will be," Dwayne replied with quiet certainty. "We've given them something to hold on to. People want more than just headlines. They want change." The first big win came when an influential international journalist, Elena Sanchez, publicly endorsed their mission. Elena had been a long-time advocate for transparency in government and had exposed numerous cover-ups in the past. Her statement gave their cause a level of legitimacy that had previously been lacking. Elena's words were powerful, and they resonated worldwide. "What Dwayne and his team have uncovered is not just a scandal. It's a wake-up call for us all," she had said. "This is about more than a privacy breach. It's about the erosion of our rights as citizens. If we don't act now, we risk losing what we hold dear." Her endorsement was a turning point. With Elena's backing, many other prominent journalists, activists, and experts began publicly supporting their cause. The media attention intensified. Suddenly, Dwayne's name wasn't just a whisper, it was everywhere. But it wasn't just the press that was reacting. Public sentiment was shifting in their favor as well. People who had been skeptical about the extent of the corruption now found themselves joining the growing chorus of voices calling for change. Protests sprang up in major cities across the globe. People wore Dwayne's face on their signs and shirts, calling for accountability and justice. "I can't believe how fast this is spreading," Marcus said one evening, scrolling through his phone. "This is bigger than we thought." Dwayne leaned back in his chair, watching the coverage unfold. "This is just the beginning. If we play this right, we can change everything." But even as the movement gained strength, Dwayne knew they were walking a razor-thin line. They had made enemies, powerful enemies. The government was digging in its heels, and corporations that had been exposed were looking for ways to fight back. The media's endorsement was vital, but it also put an even bigger target on their backs. "We can't afford to let our guard down," Dwayne said, his voice steady. "The more we push forward, the more they'll come after us. We need to be ready for anything." Late one night, as Dwayne stood at the window of his apartment overlooking the city, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Zoe. "We've got a lead. One of the higher-ups in the surveillance program wants to talk. They're willing to provide more evidence. This could be the breakthrough we need." Dwayne's heart rate quickened. This was the kind of lead they had been waiting for. Someone with first-hand knowledge of the program who could give them irrefutable proof to take down the entire operation. But he also knew the risks. Going after high-level officials meant entering dangerous territory. "They want to meet tomorrow," Zoe continued. But it's risky. We'll need to make sure they're who they say they are. Dwayne set the phone down, deep in thought. The stakes were rising every day. They had gained allies, but they also had drawn a line in the sand. They couldn't back down now. We're going to meet them, Dwayne finally said, his decision firm. We can't let this opportunity slip away. The next day, Dwayne and his team met with the whistleblower in a secure location. The man, who went by the name David, was nervous, but his information was everything they had hoped for. He had worked directly in the department overseeing the surveillance, and he knew the ins and outs of how it operated. I can give you the names, the codes, the whole structure, David said, his voice trembling, but you have to promise me that you'll protect me. They'll come for me if they find out. We'll make sure you're safe, Dwayne promised, but you have to be sure about this. Once you go public, there's no turning back. David nodded, his resolve hardening. I've seen enough. I can't let this go on anymore. The information David provided was a game changer. With this new evidence, they now had the proof they needed to take the story even further. It was one thing to expose a program. It was another thing entirely to have the insider knowledge that proved its full scope and depth. But as the plan to release this final piece of the puzzle began to take shape, Dwayne knew one thing. The storm was coming, and it would be the most dangerous one yet. The days that followed were a whirlwind. With the explosive new evidence David had provided, Dwayne and his team went into overdrive. They worked tirelessly, making sure every detail was verified, every lead checked, and every angle covered. The data they had now was unlike anything they had worked with before. A comprehensive breakdown of the surveillance program that had been operating in the shadows for years, collecting data on citizens, undermining their privacy, and secretly manipulating political decisions. The world had been lulled into a sense of security, oblivious to the extensive system of control that had been built right under their noses. Now, they had the key to unlock the door and show everyone what had been hidden behind it. But the closer they got to releasing this final batch of information, the heavier the weight of the responsibility felt. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about setting off a chain reaction that could change the course of history, for better or for worse. Dwayne sat in his office late one evening, scrolling through the files one more time. His eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop himself from reviewing every detail. He needed to be sure that nothing could be used against them. Every piece of information, every name, every piece of data had to be perfect. Marcus walked in, his expression grim. We're running out of time. The pressure's mounting. We need to release it before they can bury it. Dwayne nodded, his mind racing. We've been careful up to this point. One misstep now, and everything could come crashing down. We need to time it perfectly. Olivia joined them, a concerned look on her face. The media is starting to catch wind of something bigger. There are whispers that a game-changing leak is coming. If they get ahead of us, we'll lose the initiative. We won't let that happen, Dwayne said, standing up. This is our moment. We're not waiting for them to make the first move. We'll control the narrative, and we'll release everything, all at once. As the team worked tirelessly, coordinating with their allies in the media, ensuring the leak would get global coverage, the threat from the opposition became even more palpable. The government, the corporations, the deep-pocketed interests they had exposed. They were all circling, preparing to discredit the truth and silence those behind it. It wasn't just about legal threats anymore. It was about political pressure, media manipulation, and even the possibility of more severe retaliation. Things are heating up, and I don't think they're going to let this slide easily, Zoe said, her tone filled with urgency. We've crossed the point of no return. I know, Dwayne replied, his jaw tightening, but I didn't get this far by backing down. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. The plan was set. They would release the information at the highest level. All the documents, all the names, all the secrets that had been buried for so long. The media outlets they had carefully vetted would be prepared to cover the story immediately, ensuring it would spread like wildfire across the globe. As the team prepared, Dwayne thought about everything they had sacrificed. The hours spent planning, the friendships they had forged, the constant threat hanging over their heads. But they had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. It was 3 a.m. when Dwayne finally hit the send button. The files were uploaded, The press release went live, and everything they had worked for was now in the hands of the public. The first few hours felt like a blur. Dwayne sat by his phone, watching as the world began to react. News outlets from every corner of the globe started picking up the story. Social media exploded with hashtags, debates, and posts questioning the system that had allowed such abuse of power to go on unchecked. But as the story gained momentum, so did the pushback. Government officials immediately began issuing statements trying to discredit the data, claiming it was doctored or misinterpreted. Corporations involved in the program denied any wrongdoing, calling the accusations baseless. And, as expected, the smear campaigns began. They called Dwayne a traitor, attention seeker, and even mentally unstable. They tried to drown out the truth with noise. As the hours ticked by, the intensity of the backlash grew. Dwayne's phone was flooded with messages, some of support, others from people who had no idea what they were getting themselves into. There were threats. There were warnings. There were anonymous calls telling him to back off or face the consequences. But none of it fazed him. This was the moment. The storm had arrived, and it would either break them or change the world forever. The team gathered together in their makeshift headquarters, watching the situation unfold on live news feeds. Dwayne's heart raced as he took in the magnitude of what they had done. "We've made history," Marcus said, his voice a mix of awe and concern. "Now we just have to make sure it sticks," Dwayne replied. Olivia added, "The public is on fire, but we've got enemies everywhere. They won't give up without a fight." "We won't give up either," Dwayne said, his voice unwavering. "We've got the truth, and the world deserves to know it." Hours turned into days. The news spread like wildfire, sparking debates across every social platform, news channel, and political arena. Dwayne's name was everywhere. Some were calling him a hero, others a villain. But the one thing everyone could agree on was that the truth had come out, and it was impossible to ignore. But the fight was far from over. While the world was buzzing, Dwayne knew that this was just the beginning of an even bigger battle. The forces that had been exposed would fight to protect their interests, and they wouldn't stop at anything to silence the voices behind the leak. "We've done it," Zoe said one evening, the exhaustion evident in her voice. "But the real test is what happens next." And then, the call came. It was Elena Sanchez, the journalist who had supported their cause from the very beginning. Her voice was filled with urgency. "They're coming for you, Dwayne. I don't know how long you'll have before they try to shut everything down. You need to prepare for what's coming." Dwayne's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "I don't know all the details, but they're planning something big," Elena said. "You have a target on your back. You need to be ready to go underground. Now." The walls were closing in. Dwayne had known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare him for the weight of it. The system they had exposed wasn't going to let it go easily. They had just made the most dangerous move of their lives. The truth was out. Now, it was a race against time. The phone call with Elena had left Dwayne in a state of shock. He stared at his phone, the words still ringing in his ears. "You have a target on your back." The world was reacting, yes, but so were the forces behind the scenes. The institutions they'd exposed weren't going to go down without a fight, and the stakes were higher than ever. Dwayne's eyes darted to the team around him. They all seemed just as lost in thought, processing the weight of what lay ahead. "This is it, isn't it?" Zoe said quietly, breaking the silence. "We've opened the floodgates, and now they're coming for us." Dwayne stood, walking over to the window that overlooked the city. The same city that had once felt so familiar, so comforting, now felt like a battleground. "I knew this was coming," he said, his voice steady, but there was no denying the tension in his tone. "We've known the risks from the beginning, but that doesn't make it any easier." Olivia walked up beside him, her brow furrowed. "So what now? Do we go underground, like Elena suggested, or do we stay and fight?" It was a question Dwayne had been dreading, and yet, in many ways, it was the only question that mattered. They had already made their mark, exposed a massive operation, and triggered an international wave. But there were consequences, serious consequences. Staying in the public, I would put everyone in danger, but leaving now could feel like abandoning the cause they had started. "Leaving now feels like surrendering," Dwayne replied, turning back to face the team. If we run, they'll win. And I'm not about to let that happen. But we're not just talking about you anymore, Marcus chimed in. We're talking about all of us, our families, our safety. I know we all signed up for this, but we're all in deeper than we ever imagined. The room fell silent again, the weight of Marcus' words hanging heavily in the air. Dwayne could feel the anxiety mounting in his chest. Everyone had sacrificed so much already. But if they kept pushing forward, what would the cost be? We've come too far to turn back now, Dwayne said, though his voice held a trace of uncertainty. But we need to be smart. If they're coming after us, we need a plan. We need to stay ahead of them. The decision was made. Dwayne and his team would press on, but they would do so with caution. Every move had to be calculated. They couldn't afford to be reckless now. They reached out to their allies in the media and with their international contacts to prepare for the next phase. The exposure was just the beginning, but there was so much more to do to ensure the truth didn't get buried beneath layers of misinformation and government pressure. They began setting up secure communication channels, encrypting everything, and planning their next move with even more secrecy. Trust was their most valuable currency, and each of them knew that the slightest slip-up could be their last. Days turned into weeks, and the world was still reeling from the massive leak. News stories were still circulating, with new revelations emerging daily. But the backlash was escalating. Dwayne couldn't help but feel like the net was tightening. Every news anchor who spoke out in favor of the whistleblower was met with attacks. Every reporter who continued to cover the story faced threats. The powerful forces that had once operated in the shadows were now using every tactic they had to suppress the truth, and they were getting creative. It wasn't just the legal pressure anymore. It was the media blackout. The disinformation campaigns ramped up. The social media platforms started to flood with false narratives and smear campaigns against Dwayne and his team. Lies were being spread, photos were doctored, and every truth was twisted to suit the narrative they wanted to create. One evening, while Dwayne was at his apartment, checking the latest updates, a knock at the door startled him. His heart skipped a beat. A knock this late could mean only one thing. The team? He opened the door cautiously, only to find Marcus standing there, his face grave. "They found us," Marcus said, his voice strained. "We need to move now." Dwayne's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "They've traced the leak back to us. They know where we are. We don't have much time." In that moment, everything shifted. The fight had always been about exposing the truth, but now it was about survival. They had triggered a storm, and now the people behind it weren't just trying to discredit them. They were hunting them. Minutes later, the team gathered in their secure location, a hidden safe house that had been set up in anticipation of a moment like this. Dwayne's heart pounded as they quickly began packing their things. "We've got two options," Zoe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can either go public again, use everything we've got to expose the full scope of this conspiracy, or we disappear and go underground for a while. Lay low until we've got a better strategy." Dwayne thought for a moment. Each choice came with its own risks. Going public again would mean even more heat, more media attention, but it could also mean the final push needed to expose the entire operation for good. On the other hand, disappearing now would buy them time, but at the cost of leaving the world in the dark about what was really happening. "What's it going to be?" Olivia asked, looking at Dwayne. "We keep fighting," Dwayne said, his voice steady, though inside he was fighting his own doubts. "But we do it on our terms. We make them come to us. We've got the truth. It's time to finish this." They quickly made arrangements to go on the offensive again, but this time, with more caution and preparation. Dwayne was no longer just the whistleblower. He had become the face of a global movement. This was bigger than them now. This was about the future. But even as they rallied their final allies, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was lurking just beyond the horizon. The system they had exposed wasn't going to go down easily. And with every step they took, the consequences of their actions became more and more apparent. The storm was here. There was no turning back now. The choices they made in the next few days would determine whether they could bring about real change, or whether they would be silenced for good. Dwayne's phone buzzed violently in his hand, the screen lighting up with an alert. A new headline flashed across the screen. "Whistleblower behind controversial leak now threatened by government forces. His heart raced as he read the article. They weren't wasting any time. The storm had already arrived at full force. The article went on to detail that the authorities had now issued a formal statement, claiming that Dwayne and his team were responsible for a massive breach of national security. It didn't just implicate them in the leak. It painted them as domestic terrorists, collaborating with hostile foreign interests. Dwayne felt his stomach twist. They were trying to brand them as enemies of the state. They couldn't let that narrative stick. "This is getting out of hand," Zoe said, her voice tight as she scanned the same news article. "They've got the media on their side. Every outlet is calling us traitors now." "It doesn't matter," Dwayne replied, slamming his phone down onto the table. "We've faced worse. We've exposed their dirty secrets. They're not going to just let it go." Marcus looked up, his face grim. "But we need to act fast. The media frenzy will die down soon, but if we don't do something big, they'll bury this. And once they do, the next leak won't matter. We need to push harder." Dwayne nodded. The time for careful maneuvering had passed. They had waited, planned, and hidden in the shadows long enough. They had already shaken the system to its core. Now, it was time to finish it. "We release everything," Dwayne said, his voice firm. "The full archive. Every document. Every name. Let them see it all." "Are you sure?" Olivia asked, her voice tense. "Once we do that, there's no going back." "I know," Dwayne said, his eyes scanning the room, meeting each of their gazes. "But if we keep holding back, they'll just keep coming after us. This is it. We hit them with everything." The plan was set in motion. The team began finalizing the release, encrypting the massive archive of classified files and surveillance data. The world didn't yet know just how deep the conspiracy went. They'd only seen the surface. But now they would see everything. The extent of the corruption, the web of lies, the orchestrated efforts to undermine democracy itself. Governments, corporations, and shadowy organizations had been working together, manipulating global politics and spying on innocent civilians. It wasn't just one scandal. It was a worldwide, coordinated effort to control the masses. "We can't let them shut this down," Dwayne said as they worked late into the night. "The truth is too important." Marcus was already in contact with their allies in independent news outlets. These were the journalists who had stuck by them from the beginning, when it was still just a whisper in the dark. They were the ones who would ensure the truth didn't get buried in a wave of government propaganda. Hours later, the files were ready. The documents were sent to a handful of trusted journalists and encrypted servers. The final release would be a coordinated effort across multiple platforms to guarantee that no matter what happened, the truth would come out. As the clock struck midnight, Dwayne and the team sat in the dimly lit room, watching the news outlets begin to report on the next phase of the story. Their hearts pounded as they saw the words "breaking news" flash across the screen. But just as they were about to breathe a sigh of relief, their phones rang simultaneously. It was Elena. "They know you've gone public again," she said urgently. "The government's making a move. They've already started targeting your family members. They'll stop at nothing to silence you." Dwayne's blood ran cold. He thought of his parents, his friends. He had never wanted them to get caught in the crossfire of this fight. "What do we do now?" Zoe asked, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We fight back," Dwayne said, his mind racing. "We push forward. We can't let them intimidate us." But as he spoke the words, a deep fear gnawed at him. He knew what was at stake now. Not just their freedom, but the safety of everyone they loved. By morning, the full extent of the leak was out. News outlets from around the world were covering the story. People were shocked, furious, and confused. The world's governments were scrambling to respond, calling for investigations, press conferences, and emergency sessions at the United Nations. The backlash was swift. In Washington, D.C., emergency meetings were held. In London, the Prime Minister addressed the nation, condemning the leak and vowing to track down those responsible. The international outcry was enormous, but so was the support for Dwayne and his team. But then came the threats, the calls, the knocks on the door. As the team sat gathered in their safe house, the tension became unbearable. "I'm hearing reports that they've set up a task force to hunt us down," Olivia said, her face pale. They're going after anyone connected to the leak, and they're using everything they have to find us. They've got the resources, Marcus said, his voice low. But we've got the truth, and the world's watching. We just need to survive long enough to get it all out there. Suddenly, the door crashed open. Dwayne's heart nearly stopped. They hadn't been careful enough. Someone had found them. But instead of government agents or shadowy figures, it was a familiar face. Elena, Dwayne breathed in relief. What are you doing here? We don't have much time, Elena said, breathless. The authorities are on their way here. You need to leave now. Panic surged through the team as they gathered their things, racing against the clock. Elena led them to a back exit, where a black SUV was waiting. The plan had changed again. They couldn't stay in one place for long. It was a race to stay ahead of those who were closing in. As they piled into the car, Dwayne felt a sharp pang of guilt. Were they abandoning the mission? Were they giving in to fear? But deep down, he knew that for the truth to survive, they had to live to fight another day. We'll finish this, Dwayne said, looking out the window as they sped away. We'll expose them all. This isn't over. But as the car took a sharp turn down an alley, Dwayne felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. He was fighting for his life, for his friends, for the people who had trusted him. And somewhere in the distance, the shadow of the enemy was closing in. The SUV screeched through the night, weaving between darkened streets. Dwayne's pulse was a constant thrum in his ears, louder than the engine's roar. They were on the run now, no longer just fighting for the truth, but for their lives. His hands gripped the seat, knuckles white. They had exposed something dangerous, far more dangerous than they'd ever anticipated. Elena glanced nervously out the rear window. We don't have much time. The task force is already closing in on the city. They're tracking us, watching our every move. You've been marked. Dwayne leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. They were far from safe, but for now, they had a brief window of opportunity. The truth was out there, but if they didn't find a way to keep it in the public eye, the system would crush it, and them, before they could do anything about it. We need to get to the drop point, Dwayne said, voice steady but filled with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. Once we get there, we'll reach out to our backup. They'll help us get this out to more outlets. You're not hearing me, Elena snapped, her eyes wide with fear. There's no time. They've already started closing all exits. The borders, the airports, everywhere. They'll catch up with you before you can make it. Zoe let out a breath, her mind clearly working overtime. Then what do? We can't just run forever. We need a real plan. We need to make sure this information gets out for good. Marcus was silent, his hands fidgeting with his phone, trying to confirm their backup plans. The team had been careful to set up multiple routes in case of an emergency like this, but every moment felt like a lifetime. They were out of options, and the longer they waited, the harder it would be to get ahead of the task force hunting them. There's a place we can go, Elena said finally, her voice quieter but resolute. It's out of the country. We can lay low for a while until things die down. I've got contacts there. They can help. Dwayne hesitated, weighing his options. The safe house idea was no longer safe. They couldn't rely on old plans. It wasn't just about escaping. It was about surviving long enough to finish what they started. Okay, Dwayne said, his mind made up. We go there. But we can't just disappear. We need to get this information into the right hands while we can. If we wait too long, it'll be too late. As the car sped toward the airport, the weight of the decision began to settle over Dwayne's shoulders. Every step they took now could be their last. But he couldn't afford to think that way. They had come this far, and no matter the risks, they had to see it through. What about your families? Olivia asked, breaking the silence. Have you been in contact with them? Let them know you're safe? Dwayne didn't answer right away. He knew he couldn't risk putting them in further danger. They were already in enough jeopardy. And yet, his heart ached with the thought of leaving them in the dark. I'll reach out when we can, he said finally. But right now, we need to focus on getting this information out. Once we're out of the country, we'll find a way to send updates. But until then, everyone needs to stay out of sight. At the airport, the team quickly made their way through the back halls. They had arranged everything in advance, including fake IDs and emergency routes, but as they walked toward the gates, the reality of their situation hit with full force. There was no going back. There was no safety net. Dwayne's phone buzzed again, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw the message from one of their trusted journalists. The first wave of the leak has gone viral. The government is scrambling to contain it, but their press conferences are full of holes. The public is demanding more, but so far, they're not letting it go. He looked up at the others. It's happening. People are starting to wake up. I just hope it's not too late, Marcus muttered, scanning the crowds. We're not out of the woods yet, and I'm getting a feeling that our exit is going to be a lot harder than we thought. As they made their way through the terminal, the tension in the air thickened. Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was the kind of gut instinct that had served him well in the past, and it was screaming at him now. Move fast, Dwayne ordered, his voice low and commanding. If anyone is tailing us, they'll be here any second. They pushed through the airport, sticking to back alleys and hidden hallways to avoid detection. Their flight was ready, and they had just enough time to slip past security. But as they neared the gate, something caught Dwayne's eye. A figure stood in the shadows near the terminal entrance. A familiar face. It was a man in a dark suit, wearing sunglasses despite the late hour. Dwayne's blood ran cold. It wasn't just any traveler. It was a government agent, one he recognized from earlier intel. Run, Dwayne shouted, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her toward the nearest exit. But it was too late. A voice echoed through the terminal. There he is, the agent shouted, pointing directly at Dwayne. Stop right there. Panic hit like a tidal wave as the group sprinted toward the nearest door, pushing past startled travelers. Behind them, agents swarmed into the terminal, their footsteps heavy and relentless. Move, Zoe shouted, her voice strained as she pulled ahead, her instincts kicking in. They had practiced for moments like this, but it never felt real until you were in the thick of it. Just as they reached the emergency exit, a loud crash echoed through the terminal. A handful of armed men emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. Dwayne's mind raced. The room felt smaller with every passing second. Elena, Dwayne barked. The backup route now. Get us out of here. With a quick nod, Elena led the group through a service door and down a narrow hallway that led to the parking garage below. But as they turned the corner, they ran into a roadblock. More agents. They were cornered. Their options were running out, and fast. Dwayne's heart hammered in his chest as he looked around, scanning the dimly lit parking garage. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, a constant reminder that they were trapped. The exits were blocked, and with every passing second, it seemed like the walls were closing in tighter. Elena grabbed Dwayne's arm, her face pale. We need to act fast. There's a car waiting for us down the hall, but they're already onto us. If we don't move now, we won't make it out alive. Dwayne nodded grimly, turning to the others. We stick together. We go through the back way, and we don't stop until we're out of here. Marcus checked his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he swiped through messages. The backups are already being compromised, he said, his voice tense. The agents are all over the place. We'll be lucky to make it to the car without being caught. Then we don't make it to the car, Zoe said, her eyes narrowing. We make them come to us. Dwayne's stomach tightened. Zoe wasn't the one to suggest a stand, but in this moment, she was right. They were on borrowed time, and if they ran, they'd just be running forever. It was time to face the music. They would be hunted down sooner or later anyway. Set up the perimeter, Dwayne ordered, his voice cold and decisive. If they're going to come for us, we'll make sure they know they're in for a fight. The team moved quickly, slipping into the shadows of the garage and taking up positions near the columns, weapons drawn. Dwayne's mind raced, but there was a sharp clarity to his thoughts now. They didn't have much left to lose, but they still had the one thing the government couldn't take from them, the truth. And that truth, no matter what happened, needed to get out. As the sound of footsteps grew louder, Dwayne braced himself, his heart pounding. He could hear the agents' voices now, low and authoritative. There's somewhere down here. Search every corner. Stay sharp, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. They're not going to give us a chance to slip away again. A loud crash echoed through the garage as one of the agents kicked open a door to a storage room. They were getting closer. Dwayne could see them now, silhouettes moving in the dim light. Their eyes were trained on the shadows, but they hadn't yet noticed the team. "On my mark," Dwayne said quietly, his finger resting on the trigger of his weapon. "Wait until they're in position." The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity. Dwayne's pulse raced in his ears. This was it. They couldn't run anymore. If they were going to survive, they had to fight. The lead agent moved closer, his flashlight sweeping across the floor, and Dwayne's grip tightened. The moment was approaching. His eyes locked on Marcus, who nodded in response. They were ready. "Now!" Dwayne shouted. The first shots rang out, sharp and loud, echoing through the parking garage. The agents, caught off guard, scrambled for cover. Dwayne's team didn't hesitate. They moved fast, taking advantage of the chaos. Zoe and Olivia took out two of the agents' position near the far side, while Dwayne and Marcus pushed forward toward the exit. "Move!" Dwayne shouted, his voice urgent. The agents were disoriented, but they were quick. They wouldn't stay down for long. A loud crack sounded behind Dwayne as one of the agents fired back, narrowly missing him. Dwayne ducked, pulling Marcus to the side for cover. "We don't have long. Get to the car now." The team raced through the garage, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. The car was just ahead, a sleek black sedan waiting at the far end, its engine running. They could see the headlights flash as they neared it. But before they could make it to the vehicle, a shout rang out. "Stop right there." Dwayne turned just in time to see the lead agent, his gun raised and aimed directly at him. The agent's voice was cold, laced with frustration. "You're not getting away this time." Dwayne's heart sank, and for a split second, he thought it was over. But then, from behind the agent, came a loud crash. A figure burst from the shadows, knocking the agent off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground. It was Elena. She had circled around, using the chaos to her advantage. Without hesitation, she grabbed the agent's gun and disarmed him. "Get in the car!" she shouted, tossing Dwayne the gun. Dwayne didn't wait to thank her. They had no time to lose. The team piled into the car, and the engine roared to life as they sped away from the garage. But as they raced toward the exit, another car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights blinding them. It was another team of agents, a backup unit. "Damn it," Marcus muttered, looking over his shoulder. "We're not out of the woods yet." The team's pulse quickened, but Dwayne's mind was already working, calculating their next move. They couldn't outrun them. Not like this. "We need a diversion," Dwayne said, his voice sharp. "Zoe, can you slow them down?" Zoe grinned, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "You got it." Without warning, she pulled out a small device from her bag and tossed it onto the road behind them. The device emitted a blinding flash of light, temporarily blinding the agent's vehicle. Dwayne's heart raced as they pushed forward, the distraction working just long enough for them to gain some distance. "Go, go, go," Dwayne shouted, slamming his fist against the dashboard. The team sped out of the parking lot and onto the main road. The agents were behind them, but they were momentarily disoriented. For now, they had an edge. But Dwayne knew it wouldn't last long. They were still in the city, still vulnerable. Their only hope was to get out of the country, to escape the government's reach long enough to finish what they had started. They had exposed the lies, but it wasn't enough. They needed to take the final step. As the car tore down the road, Dwayne's thoughts turned back to the mission. There was no turning back now. They were all in. And this fight was just beginning. The car sped through the night, tires screeching as Dwayne's heart raced in time with the engine's roar. The streets blurred past them, shadows from streetlights flashing over the windshield. The team's breaths were shallow and quick, and the tension was thick in the air. Every minute that passed felt like a countdown. "We can't keep running," Zoe said, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "We need a safe house. Somewhere they won't expect." Dwayne's mind was already working on overdrive. He knew Zoe was right. They couldn't just keep dodging. But the problem was, the safe houses, the routes, the contacts, they were all compromised now. The government was everywhere. The network they had spent years building had already been torn apart. "We head to the border," Dwayne said, voice steady but urgent. Get to a location that's off the grid. We don't need a safe house. We need a plan to vanish completely. Olivia leaned forward, her brow furrowed. And what happens when we get there? We can't stay hidden forever. Dwayne turned to face her, his eyes unwavering. We make sure the truth is out there. Then we make sure no one can stop it. We finish what we started. Marcus nodded grimly, his fingers drumming on his phone. It's going to take more than a few leaks to stop them. But I'm sending everything to the encrypted server now. Once it's out, it's out. There's no going back. The weight of his words hung in the air. The files, the data that could take down entire governments, were in the hands of the right people. The world was about to see everything. They had exposed corruption, betrayal, and espionage at a global scale. The question now was how long they would have before the world's most powerful forces would move to silence them. As the car sped on, Dwayne's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Elena. They're coming for you. I've heard whispers. High-level officials want to make an example out of you. Don't trust anyone. Watch your back. Dwayne's jaw clenched. He had known the risk, but seeing the reality of the situation unfold like this, it made the threat feel too close to home. We keep moving, he said, his voice hard. We don't stop. They can't get us if we keep ahead of them. Zoe gave him a pointed look. That's easier said than done, Dwayne. We've been one step ahead, but we're running out of places to hide. And I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the heat is on. They know exactly who we are. Then it's time we give them something they can't ignore, Dwayne said, his voice calm yet resolute. As they approached the border, Dwayne could see the flashing lights of the checkpoint in the distance. His stomach tightened. The agents were closing in, and they couldn't afford to be stopped now. We have to get past this checkpoint, he said through gritted teeth. Once we're across, we can vanish. But we need to act fast. The closer they got to the checkpoint, the more Dwayne could feel the presence of danger looming. Every car they passed, every patrol officer, every pair of eyes on them felt like an enemy. But he wouldn't stop. Not now. Zoe, you drive, Dwayne ordered. Marcus, keep your head down. We'll go through quietly. Let's not draw attention. Zoe took a sharp left, moving down a side road to avoid the main checkpoint. Dwayne's fingers tightened around the seat, but he stayed silent, watching their surroundings. As they moved farther away from the main route, a thick silence fell over the team. The farther they went, the more isolated they felt, like they were disappearing from the world. But the silence was broken when Dwayne's phone rang again. It was Elena. Get out of there, she said quickly, her voice shaking. They've got your location. I don't know how they did it, but they're tracking you. You need to move now. Dwayne's pulse spiked. What do you mean they're tracking us? How? I don't know, but they've hacked into your devices, Elena said, panic creeping into her voice. They know everything. They're coming for you. Fast. Before Dwayne could respond, the unmistakable sound of tires screeching cut through the air. A black SUV came into view, barreling down the road behind them, its headlights blinding. The agents were here. Go! Dwayne barked. Zoe slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the car shot forward, tires skidding as they narrowly avoided a collision with the SUV. They were being hunted, and now there was no more room for caution. It was a race for survival. Dwayne glanced over his shoulder. More vehicles were closing in. They weren't going to outrun them this time, but they still had one car to play. Marcus, Dwayne said, his voice low, are you ready? Marcus didn't respond at first, but then he turned to Dwayne with a grim expression. He knew what Dwayne meant. They couldn't escape forever. It was time to turn the tables. Let's do it, Marcus replied, setting his phone down and pulling out a small device from his bag. It's time we finish this. The team sped down the winding road, but the agents were relentless. They were closing the gap, and Dwayne could feel the pressure mounting. Every breath felt harder to take. The sound of the engines grew louder, and soon, the agents would be right on top of them. As Zoe swerved the car around a sharp bend, Marcus pressed a button on his device. The sound of a loud explosion echoed in the distance. What the hell was that? Zoe exclaimed, her hands gripping the wheel. That's our backup, Marcus said coolly, a fierce glint in his eyes. The agents think we're still on that road, but now, they've got a bigger problem. Dwayne's heart skipped a beat as the lights ahead grew dimmer. The agents were confused, disoriented by the explosion. They thought they were chasing the team down a different path. This was their chance. "We've got to push through the final leg," Dwayne said, eyes focused on the road. "This is the last stretch. We can't waste this." The car sped forward, now gaining distance on their pursuers. But just as they approached the last turn before the border, a new danger appeared. A barricade of vehicles blocking the road. "We're trapped," Olivia muttered, eyes darting to the side. No way through. Dwayne's mind raced. This was it, the moment they would either escape or be caught. He had no plan B. They either made it past the barricade, or everything they fought for was lost. "Prepare for impact," Dwayne said, his voice steady. Zoe didn't hesitate. With a roar, she slammed the car into the barricade. The car crashed into the barricade with a sickening thud, the impact jarring Dwayne's whole body as the metal frame bent and groaned under the force. The air was filled with the screech of twisting metal and the scent of burnt rubber. Time seemed to slow, the world outside becoming a blur of flashing lights and confusion. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the engine sputtered, and the car came to a shuddering stop inches from the barricade. Dwayne's heart pounded in his chest as the dust settled, his grip still tight on the seat. The team had barely survived the crash, and now they were stranded on the wrong side of a blockade, facing a situation that had no clear exit. "Is everyone okay?" Dwayne's voice was hoarse, the question more out of instinct than concern. He knew they had no time to waste. Olivia nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm good," she said, though her hands were shaking slightly. Marcus was already out of the car, scanning the surroundings. "We're not going to be able to backtrack. They'll have us cornered if we stay here much longer. We need to move now." Zoe slammed her hand against the steering wheel in frustration. "Damn it, I can't believe this is happening. We're so close, yet here we are." She was shaken, but there was a fire in her eyes. Dwayne's mind was already working through their options. The agents wouldn't be far behind. They had to think fast, or they'd be captured before they could finish what they started. "Everyone out," Dwayne shouted as he pulled the door open. "We're not staying here for long. Get to the alley behind the trucks. We'll figure this out once we're off the main road." The team scrambled out of the car and darted toward the alley, sticking close to the shadows as the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. The flash of headlights illuminated the road ahead, revealing a convoy of government SUVs creeping toward the barricade, their tires grinding against the gravel. "They'll be here in less than a minute," Marcus said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to get ahead of them. We can't let them catch us off guard." Dwayne's eyes scanned the alley. It was narrow, barely wide enough for all of them to move through side by side. The sound of sirens echoed through the distance, the countdown to their final escape ticking away. "Zoe, Olivia, take the left. Marcus, you're with me on the right. Stay hidden. Once they pass, we'll make a break for it." They all nodded, moving quickly and silently through the darkness. The alley was filled with the smell of oil and dampness, the walls closing in on them as they crept forward. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, crouched low against the walls. Dwayne's heartbeat was steady now, but his mind was racing. He couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had led to this point. The mission, the lies, the betrayal. And now, they were on the edge of the precipice. So close to the finish line, but with every step, it felt like they were being pulled deeper into a trap. Zoe's voice cut through his thoughts. "They're moving. It's our chance." Dwayne didn't hesitate. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, go." They bolted from the alley, sprinting toward the edge of the road where a forgotten side street led to a more remote route out of the city. But as they ran, the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a halt behind them made Dwayne's blood run cold. "Stop right there." The voice echoed, cold and commanding. The agents had spotted them. Dwayne's instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he drew his weapon. "Cover me," he shouted, taking the lead as he fired 2 quick shots at the nearest agents, forcing them to dive for cover. "Go!" Zoe yelled, pulling Olivia by the arm as they sprinted forward. "We're not getting caught today." Dwayne turned to see Marcus covering their backs, his gun aimed at the approaching agents. Get to the gate, Marcus shouted. I'll hold them off. Dwayne nodded, but his mind was spinning. The gate, that was the exit. But they had no time to get there without getting caught in the crossfire. Go, 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 Dwayne urged, pushing forward with the others, his heart pounding in his ears. They reached the gate just as more agents poured out from the cars, weapons drawn. Dwayne was the first to reach it, throwing himself against the metal frame. He gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he pushed the gate open just enough for the team to slip through. Zoe went first, followed by Olivia. Marcus was right behind them, but just as Dwayne stepped through the gate, a sharp crack sounded through the air. A bullet grazed his shoulder, sending a shock of pain through his arm. He winced, but didn't stop. He couldn't. Move, he barked, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Marcus grabbed his arm, pulling him forward as they all ducked into the shadows of a nearby alley. Dwayne could hear the agents shouting, their footsteps pounding the pavement as they chased after them. But they had one thing in their favor now. They were in the maze of the city's hidden streets. The agents couldn't track them through this. The team continued to run, their breaths ragged but steady. They passed through alley after alley, twisting and turning, until the sounds of the agents faded behind them. For now, they were safe. But Dwayne knew it wouldn't last long. The agents would regroup, re-strategize. They'd be hunting them again in no time. But this time, Dwayne wasn't running. This time, he was going to fight back with everything he had. All right, we're clear for now, Marcus said, checking the surroundings. But we can't keep moving through the city like this. They'll be expecting us. Dwayne nodded, his thoughts clear despite the chaos. We need to get out of the country. Find a place where they won't find us. Zoe and Olivia exchanged glances. The files, you sure they're secure? Zoe asked, voice low. Dwayne's jaw clenched. They're safe. And once we get across the border, we'll make sure the world knows everything. The truth has to survive, no matter what. As the team made their way toward their last hope of escape, Dwayne could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. This was the final act. There was no turning back. They had crossed the line, and now, all they could do was finish what they had started. Dwayne and his team moved swiftly through the darkened alleyways, the weight of their mission heavier than ever. The night air was thick, filled with the scent of rain, and the distant sounds of sirens and honking horns seemed like an endless reminder that they were running out of time. They had reached a quiet, secluded area of the city, far from the places where government eyes would be watching. The tension between the team was palpable, but Dwayne knew there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep pushing forward. The plan was simple, but risky. They needed to get to a safe location across the border, a place where they could release the data that would bring the truth to the world. It was their final chance to expose the corrupt forces that had controlled their lives for far too long. The truth could change everything. But the closer they got to their destination, the more Dwayne could feel the walls closing in. The government had eyes everywhere, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. Where exactly are we heading? Olivia asked, breaking the silence as they walked in the shadows. We'll cross the border near the old industrial zone, Dwayne said, his voice steady but tired. Once we get there, we'll make contact with our network. They'll help us upload the files. After that, it's a race against time. Marcus looked over at him. And what happens if they catch us before we get to the network? Dwayne's eyes hardened. Then we fight. We won't let them stop us. Not this time. Zoe, ever the pragmatist, glanced back over her shoulder. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to make this the last run. If they're gonna come for us, they better come prepared. Her words hung in the air, the confidence in her voice laced with a quiet fear. It was clear that they all knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was about survival. It was about exposing the lies and making sure the world would never forget. As they approached the edge of the city, the distant glow of streetlights faded, and the sounds of life grew quieter. The industrial zone was just ahead, a labyrinth of decaying warehouses and long-abandoned factories. It was a place where the shadows were thick enough to swallow a person whole. Dwayne stopped at the entrance of an old brick building, its windows boarded up and the door hanging off its hinges. The place was desolate, but that was exactly what they needed. This is the spot, Dwayne said. Marcus, check the comms and set up the encryption. Zoe, Olivia, stay on lookout. We can't afford to be ambushed now. They all nodded, quickly moving into position. Marcus pulled out his tablet and connected to the satellite link. His fingers danced over the screen as he accessed the secure network they had set up. "We're good to go," Marcus said after a few tense moments, his eyes narrowing as he watched the data start flowing. "Uploading now." But just as the files began to transfer, a faint sound reached their ears, the unmistakable hum of engines in the distance. "They're here," Zoe muttered under her breath, her hand already on the weapon at her side. Dwayne's heart skipped a beat. The government was closing in. They were moments away from being surrounded. "Get ready," Dwayne said, his voice low and commanding. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." "Marcus, finish the upload. The data has to get out." Marcus didn't hesitate, his focus unshakable. "I'm almost there." The first SUV rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Dwayne's grip on his weapon tightened. They were outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise. "Stay low and wait for my signal," Dwayne said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. As the SUV approached, Dwayne saw the glint of the agents' weapons through the tinted windows. He knew they wouldn't hesitate to shoot. "Now!" Dwayne shouted. The team sprang into action. Zoe and Olivia fired first, hitting the tires of the SUV and causing it to spin out of control. The vehicle careened into a nearby lamppost, its headlights flickering before going dark. "Move," Dwayne commanded. The team took off, moving swiftly between the buildings. They could hear the agents shouting behind them, but Dwayne kept his focus forward, eyes scanning every corner and every potential threat. The sounds of gunfire echoed in the night, but Dwayne knew they had to press forward. They couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to finishing what they had started. Marcus's voice came through the comms. "The files are almost done. Just a few more seconds." But Dwayne knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The agents were closing in. He could feel it. "We don't have much time," Dwayne said, his voice low. "Get ready to move once the upload is complete. We make our way to the escape route in the back. No detours." "Got it." They all nodded. Zoe and Olivia kept watch, their weapons at the ready, while Marcus kept his focus on the screen. Every second felt like an eternity. The agents were getting closer now, the sound of boots pounding against the concrete growing louder. Dwayne turned to face the team. "On my mark. We move." Suddenly, Marcus shouted, "It's done. The data's out. The world has it now." A surge of relief rushed through Dwayne, but there was no time to celebrate. They had one chance left, to escape. "Let's go," Dwayne yelled. The team burst into motion, sprinting toward the back of the building. They could hear the agents' footsteps behind them, and Dwayne knew that this time, they wouldn't be able to outrun them forever. As they neared the back exit, the sound of an engine roared to life. The agents had deployed another vehicle, and it was barreling toward them. "Take cover," Dwayne shouted. The team ducked behind a stack of crates, barely avoiding the headlights as the SUV skidded to a halt in front of them. The doors flew open, and armed agents poured out. Dwayne looked at his team, determination in his eyes. "We're not going down without a fight." The battle was fierce. Bullets flew, ricocheting off walls and crates. Dwayne and his team fought with everything they had, but they were outgunned and outnumbered. Dwayne's heart raced, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Every shot he fired felt like it could be his last. But they couldn't stop now, not when the truth was finally out. Zoe took down two agents with a swift shot to their legs, while Olivia and Marcus provided cover fire. Dwayne moved with precision, taking out one agent after another. But the odds were stacking against them. Then, just as it seemed like the end was near, a sudden burst of light appeared. A helicopter overhead, its spotlight shining down on the battlefield. "Get down," Dwayne shouted. The team ducked, but the helicopter's spotlight blinded the agents. The whir of blades filled the air, and Dwayne realized that someone, an ally, had come to their rescue. As the helicopter descended, armed men rappelled down, quickly securing the area. The agents were caught off guard, retreating into the shadows. "Dwayne Johnson?" A voice called from the helicopter. Dwayne looked up to see a familiar face, a contact from their network, part of the resistance who had promised backup. "It's time to go," the man said, extending his hand. Dwayne took it, relief flooding through him as they made their way toward the helicopter. The team climbed aboard, the engines roaring as they lifted off, leaving the chaos of the industrial zone behind. Dwayne glanced at his team, their faces weary but determined. "We did it," Marcus said, a small smile breaking through the tension. Dwayne nodded, but his gaze was far away, focused on the horizon. The truth had been exposed. The world would know everything, but the fight wasn't over. It never would be. The helicopter sliced through the night sky, its powerful blades cutting through the cool air. Dwayne sat silently, his mind racing as the landscape below grew smaller and smaller. They had escaped, for now, but as the world shifted beneath them, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was only just beginning. The team sat around him, their faces marked by exhaustion, but also by something else, a quiet hope. The mission was complete. The truth was out there now, streaming across the world, exposing the corruption, the deceit, and the lies. But what would happen after that? Dwayne's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the darkness. He could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what they had accomplished. They had faced impossible odds, and yet, here they were, alive, and with the world's most dangerous secrets in their hands. "Where do we go from here?" Zoe's voice broke the silence, her tone thoughtful but tinged with uncertainty. "We go forward," Dwayne replied, his voice steady but tired. "We keep fighting. The world knows the truth now, but it won't be easy. There's always going to be someone who wants to bury it, someone who wants to shut us down. But we've shown them we won't back down." Marcus nodded, his eyes narrowing as he processed Dwayne's words. "We've made enemies, big ones, but we've also gained allies. The resistance, the people who want to see change, they'll stand with us." Olivia, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I've never been more scared, but I've also never felt more alive. What we did, it matters. We've already changed the course of history." Dwayne turned his eyes back to his team, his voice firm. "That's why we can't stop. This is bigger than any of us now. We've got the truth, and we'll make sure the world knows it, no matter the cost." For a moment, the team was quiet, each of them grappling with the enormity of what they had just accomplished. They had taken down an empire built on lies, shattered the illusion that those in power were untouchable. But the question remained, what now? What did life look like in the aftermath of their victory? The helicopter descended toward an undisclosed location, a safe house deep in the mountains, far from prying eyes. It was here that they would regroup, recover, and plan their next move. As the chopper touched down, Dwayne's thoughts swirled. The future was uncertain. Their fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something that had been missing for so long. Hope. Not just for himself, but for the world. They stepped off the helicopter and into the cold morning air. The safe house was a quiet, fortified place, tucked away from the chaos of the outside world. It was a temporary sanctuary, a place to catch their breath before the storm came crashing down. The team gathered inside, the weight of their exhaustion palpable. But there was a sense of purpose in their eyes, something that Dwayne hadn't seen before. They had crossed the line, taken on an impossible mission, and come out the other side. And now, they had a choice, to hide, to run, or to continue the fight. "We've come this far," Dwayne said, his voice low but resolute. "We didn't do all this just to walk away now. We've changed things, but the fight isn't over. The truth is out, and now we need to make sure it stays out there. We need to lead the charge." Zoe stepped forward, her jaw set with determination. "I'm in, all the way." Olivia, too, nodded. "We didn't risk everything for it to end here. Let's make sure we finish what we started." Marcus gave a short, clipped nod. "I'm with you. We've got work to do." Dwayne looked at each of them, his heart swelling with pride. They were no longer just a team. They were a movement that was bigger than any one of them. And that, Dwayne realized, was the true victory. As the team sat down to discuss their next steps, Dwayne took a moment to reflect. The world had been forever changed, but so had they. They had been pushed to their limits, forced to confront their deepest fears and had come out the other side stronger than ever. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They had made enemies, powerful enemies, and there would be those who would stop at nothing to silence them. But for the first time, Dwayne felt ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't alone. They weren't alone. Together, they were unstoppable. The sun had fully risen now, casting light over the mountains and the safe house. A new day had begun. A day filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with endless possibilities. And Dwayne knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, they would face it head-on. The truth had been exposed. Now, it was time for the world to deal with it. And no matter how long it took, Dwayne and his team would be there, fighting every step of the way. The battle was far from over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Dwayne and his team have made it to safety, but the fight for the truth continues. The world may be watching, but they're ready for whatever comes next. What do you think happens now? Will the truth be enough to change the world? The next chapter is yet to be written. Stay tuned.